In this lesson, you're going to learn about how we go about selecting proper public company comparables to use for valuation purposes. So whenever you're valuing a company, usually the starting point is to first figure out which set of peer companies and peer transactions you're going to be using. Now the peer transactions we're going to save for later because we're going to focus first on the public company comparables. And I'm going to show you exactly how we create such a list, how we narrow it down, and then how we select the right companies to use. So usually the starting point for this is to start with a very broad list. So in this case, you see the criteria is worldwide technology companies with over $1 billion in revenue. I've selected over $1 billion in revenue because if you recall, Apple has around 40 or $50 billion of revenue. So if we're looking at companies with only 10 million or 50 million or 100 million in revenue, it's not really appropriate. We want to really be dealing with much larger companies. So I've set a fairly broad screen here and said that we're going to start by looking at technology companies worldwide with over $1 billion in revenue. And you can see already that even though our list here is very broad, we have over 100 companies, 122 companies on here, we're still using three basic criteria for the screen. One is geography, the next is industry, and then the next is size, revenue, EBITDA, or market cap. So the geography in this case is the world, the industry is technology, and then the size is over $1 billion in revenue. And this is pretty much always the strategy that we use for picking companies like this. We want to start with something fairly broad in terms of geography, industry, and size, and then narrow it down based on the type of company that we're dealing with. If you're wondering where you can get a list like this, a lot of times you can actually find them online or find lists of the largest companies. It gets problematic when you get into very small companies, but if you look at the link below this video, I actually have up here a Forbes article on the Global 2000, so the 2000 largest companies in the world by industry. So to create this list, I literally just went through the hundreds of companies listed here, just exported everything into Excel, and this is exactly where the list is coming from. I pulled the revenue, the profits, and the market cap all from this page. So you can actually create a list like this from publicly available sources. Oftentimes when you're at a bank, your group or your bank will have internal lists and you can use those as well. So now that we have this as our starting point, let's go through this and think about how we actually want to do a screen here. So we know that Apple is a technology company, but we know that it's primarily a hardware company. So software and services companies are probably not too relevant. Internet companies, probably not too relevant. IT services companies, for example, so anything that's very labor intensive, probably not too relevant. All those businesses are going to look a lot different, and so we want to be focused on really hardware companies here. Beyond that, we also know basically that Apple is located in the US. Looking at this list, we see that a lot of these companies are in Japan, South Korea, Finland, Taiwan, Singapore, Sweden, Bermuda, and so on and so forth. So we have companies located all across the world right here, and this set, 122 companies, is just way too big. So to start with, the initial cut here, it's going to be very simple. I'm just going to look at companies that are based in the US and then only look at hardware companies. So take out everything else here. Now to do this, what I'm going to do is press Shift Spacebar and then Control and the down arrow key to select everything here. Then I'll press Alt DS to do a sort. The interface here will look a little different depending on what version of Excel you have. I'm going to say sort by location and sort on values. I'm going to say Z to A here because I want the US to be listed first. So now we have it sorted by location. What I'm going to do here is take everything that is outside the US and just cut it out. So I'll select everything with Shift Spacebar, Control down arrow key, and then Alt ED to delete all these companies. So now we're only dealing with US companies. And I can actually take out this column on location because these are all in the US now. So I'll select this with Control Spacebar and then Alt ED to delete it. The next thing I want to do is do a cut based on industry. So once again, Shift Spacebar, Control down arrow key, and then Alt DS to sort. And then for sort by, I'll go to industry, And in this case, we can just sort by A to Z here. So we see we have semiconductors, software and services, technology, and hardware and equipment. So what I'm going to do here is cut out the software and services ones. So Microsoft, Oracle, Google, for example, Yahoo, all these are huge companies, but they're not primarily hardware companies. IBM is an interesting case because IBM could actually go either way. If you look at their filings, about a third of their revenue comes from hardware, a third comes from software, a third comes from services. So we're going to cut it out because it's not primarily a hardware company anymore. So I'm selecting all these with Shift and then the down arrow key. I'm going to press Alt-ED to delete them. So now we're left with semiconductors and technology and hardware and equipment companies. So now what we want to do is further screen this. And we want to sort everything by revenue to see which companies should be cut out of this list now. Because we've cut it down substantially, but we still have around 33 companies in here, way too many for a set of public company comparables. So what I want you to do for practice is to sort everything by revenue. So go through everything I just showed you with selecting the entire set, and then going to sort with Alt-DS, and then do a sort by revenue in this case. So pause this video right now, give that a shot yourself, and then when you're done with that, you can unpause it and check your work, and I'll walk you through how to sort by revenue. Okay, good. So here's what we do. First, we go to the top and press Shift Spacebar to select the top row, then Control down arrow key to select everything, then Alt-DS to go to sort by. In this case, we're going to sort by revenue, and I'm going to go to largest to smallest here. Again, the interface will look a little different depending on what version of Excel you're using. Then I'll just hit OK. So now we see that we have everything sorted in order here. So a couple trends jump out at me. First off, there are not that many companies above 10 billion in revenue. We have a set of around 15, probably still too many for a set of public company comparables. So what I'm going to do for now is just cut out the ones below 10 billion, Alt-ED, and then we're going to look at these and see which of these should be cut and what kind of screen we should be using. One simple thing we could do here is cut it even further and say companies only above 20 billion in revenue. Given that Apple has around 40 or 42 billion, that seems appropriate. So we're going to cut again and say above 20 billion. And now we have a set of 8 companies. This is appropriate for a public company comparables analysis. I would say between 5 and 10 companies, sometimes even less than 5, sometimes as few as 3 companies you could use for this. When you get above 10, it gets a little unwieldy, so you'd like to keep it in that range. So I'm going to take off Apple because that's the company we're valuing. Then for the rest of these, so Ingram Micro and Tech Data, these are not really technology companies. These are more distributors of hardware. If you go and look at the company descriptions, you'll see that they're not really technology companies. They really just distribute hardware. And so as a result, as you can see right here, their margins are going to be very low on average. Motorola also has very low margins, but they actually create hardware and manufacture and develop hardware. So we're going to keep them in. So I'm going to take out Ingram Micro and then Tech Data right here. So now we're left with a set of 5 companies: Hewlett-Packard, Dell, Cisco, Intel, and Motorola. So some of the biggest technology companies in the world and certainly in the US. And this will be the set that we're actually going to use for our public company comparables analysis. So hopefully now you should have a better idea of how we find a set of public company comparables to use, how we screen based on industry, location, and revenue or size in the form of EBITDA margins or market cap, for example. In this example, we just went through revenue. So you should have a better idea of how we select public company comparables, how we narrow down the list, and then how we select our final set by cutting out companies that are not quite as relevant. Coming up in the next video, I'm going to be showing you an example of how we actually get information for one of these companies by using their filings and equity research. So we'll be going through Hewlett-Packard, and I'm going to show you how we actually pull the information to use for our public company comparables analysis.